Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Zeke Sandoval, and I'm grateful to be the Public Policy Manager for PATH. As many of our audience knows, PATH is one of the largest and most impactful nonprofit service providers in California, serving our unhoused neighbors in 150 cities across the state. We know that as the scale of California's housing crisis has grown, many people wonder what our local, state, and federal elected officials are doing to get people the housing and services they need to thrive. So that's why we started Lunch with Your Lawmaker, to provide an opportunity for PATH staff and supporters to hear directly from our representatives how they're working alongside us to end homelessness. So today's session is our first of 2022 and our first with the indomitable Jennifer Hart-Dietz as our CEO. Jennifer, take it away.
Thanks so much, Zeke. It's great to be with everyone here as the CEO. As many of you know, I've been with PATH for more than 8 years now, so I've conducted a lot of these discussions, but I'm especially excited to be talking now with a rising star in California, who's already been a fierce partner for PATH and our participants. Today, we're joined by Assemblymember Isaac Bryan, one of the youngest leaders in the California State Assembly and an already powerful voice on housing justice and homelessness. Before his election to the Assembly last year, he spearheaded the Measure J campaign in Los Angeles that redirected county funds to social services and led the Black Policy Project at UCLA. Assemblymember Bryan is the author of Assembly Bill 1816, the Reentry Housing and Workforce Development Program Act, funding life-changing reentry services that make sure people who have paid their debt to society don't fall into homelessness and poverty. As a co-sponsor of AB 1816 and as a provider of housing and services to many of the constituents in Mid-City Los Angeles, we're honored to welcome him in our first Lunch with Your Lawmaker event of 2022. Okay, so let's get started on some questions. It's late February now, and here at PATH, we've been commemorating the Black History Month, both by highlighting the work done by Black staff, our partners, and elected officials, and also by recognizing just how far we have to go to achieve true racial justice. And that's especially true when it comes to homelessness. We know that homelessness disproportionately affects Black Californians. So from your perspective, as the youngest Black American in the state legislature, what work lies ahead for California to really deconstruct systemic racism in housing and homelessness? And what are some achievements that you've seen that could guide the work ahead?
First and foremost, it's really great to be with you all on Black History Month. I didn't realize I was the first Lunch with Your Lawmaker conversation of the year. So thank you for that. I think we're in a really special time right now in California and in the legislature. I think it's a time of innovation and thoughtfulness, and in part because we have this budget surplus, which is exactly what we need to solve some of the problems that we have right now, or at least make the meaningful strides and steps towards the kind of future that is inclusive for all of California and one that's uplifting for those who are at the margins, especially those who are living on our streets. I think some of the guiding pieces of policy that are being uplifted and put in place right now are ones that focus on building additional affordable housing, getting folks off the streets, but also this shift and pivot towards making sure people are not falling into homelessness. Right, as you all know, for every 15 people we get off the streets, 17 people fall into homelessness. And so we've got to make sure that we're focusing on all sides of this solution and making sure that our safety net doesn't just kick into place when you're completely, ass out, so to speak, and left alone. But comes into place when you're on the margins and at the edge. And it's something that my office in particular, we're keeping a very close eye towards. And I'm hopeful that this entire body is going to keep a focus that way.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I want to talk about AB 1816, the Reentry Housing and Workforce Development Program bill. PATH is very proud to co-sponsor the bill. And as you know, we run a reentry housing program ourselves down in San Diego. What drew you to this issue, and what are your hopes for how the bill will be implemented once it passes?
Yeah, but before I was a legislator, I was an academic and an organizer. And I used to work in the city of Los Angeles in the Office of Reentry. And it was an office that we established after receiving a little bit of Prop 47 dollars. We put those dollars to great work in building out a network, a Blue Ribbon Commission on Employment Equity, and really thinking about how we can close some of these gaps. I actually wrote the city's first report on the needs of Angelenos who were coming home from incarceration, and I did it the non-traditional way. And I say that to mean traditionally in academia, you'll go and you'll talk to probation, you'll talk to corrections, you'll talk to law enforcement. I went to the Women of a New Way of Life, I went to the Anti-Recidivism Coalition. I went directly to people who were coming home and learned about the needs from a very real experience. I also have a number of family members who have either been incarcerated or are currently incarcerated. So I know just how little we do to make sure people have what they need when they come home, and especially housing. In fact, we put up barriers to attaining housing when you're formerly incarcerated. And so that has been on my mind for a number of years. And now that I'm in a position to craft policy, there's an opportunity to make a difference with it. My colleague, Assemblymember David Chu, who is now the city attorney in San Francisco, he initially proposed an idea almost identical to this last year or 2 years ago, and hit a couple of roadblocks, but really laid the foundation for this type of a conversation and for this type of a program to exist statewide. And so now that he is no longer in the legislature, it was clear to me that somebody needs to pick this up, that we can't let this kind of an idea just fall flat on its face. There are too many people counting on us, literally tens of thousands of people coming home every year who could benefit from the state investing in this kind of housing and workforce development. And so that was the real impetus for picking this up. And now it's just about bringing all my colleagues together. This is the kind of legislation that in my mind will make everybody look good who touches it, from the governor on down, right? If we do this right. And the way to do it right is to let those who are closest to the problem be the closest to presenting these solutions, and really root this in the values that I know we hold in California. All of California, north, south, central, all of California cares about housing and redemption and the kind of the fundamentals of building a good life.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We completely agree. Already just in your answer, you bring a unique perspective to the legislator. You are, young, and you also are one of the only renters, which I was astounded to hear. How do you think that impacts your energy and your work with the colleagues that you have and there in Sacramento?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to speak ill on any of my colleagues, but there's a number of legislators who are retired from some other career, right? This is the after retirement lawmaking phase of their legislative life. And for me, this is the beginning of a career that has already been very multifaceted. Before I got into the legislature, I literally had, 4 or 5 jobs because I just couldn't find the right way to make the difference I wanted to make. So I'd be at UCLA during the day, I'd be organizing during the afternoon, I'd be consulting in the evenings, just trying to build out the network of available tools for me to inflict the kind of change that I think our communities needed. And so consolidating all that into a single job as a lawmaker for my constituents, the amount of passion and energy I wake up with every day is boundless. And being a renter, I think being young in the legislature is a privilege, and it's a bonus in terms of the way I see the world, because I'm still relatively close to some of the root problems that most of California is facing, right? I remember being hungry. I remember graduating from UCLA and not being able to pay my rent and having a faculty member write me a personal check to make sure I kept a roof over my head. Even now, I live with my partner, Mara, and our best friends. And in our house, there's 4 UCLA advanced degrees, including 2 law degrees. And we are still renting a house, co-living together, because that's what it's like trying to house yourself in Los Angeles and in the Bay and in other areas of California. And so I feel still very connected to the root issues that have driven me my entire career. And so to be in a position now to inflict or to produce change in a meaningful and lasting way while still being rooted in some of these challenges is something that I'm grateful for, because I know, it's not likely that I will always be a renter. And I hope that there are more renters who fall into the legislature to continue to advocate, because we know most of California is renting. In fact, it's not even possible for everybody who lives here to own a home here. And in many of our cities, we've got more jobs than homes. And so there's a lot of work we've got to do, and I'm grateful to be a part of that solution.
Fantastic. Well, as a young renter in your district, I very much appreciate it. And speaking of there not just being enough homes, we know that homelessness is caused really by our state's severe shortage of housing, especially affordable housing. LA, for example, needs to build about 500,000 homes over the next 10 years just to meet the demand. And at the same time we build, we have to avoid gentrification and displacement, which falls disproportionately harshly on historically Black and Latina areas. You represent some of the most iconic Black neighborhoods in LA, Crenshaw, Baldwin Hills, Leimert Park, to just name a few. How do you approach this development without gentrification puzzle?
Very carefully. And this was a conversation that I was deeply embedded in, because I also touched a little bit of Inglewood, and we just had the Super Bowl, right? And what did it mean to build the most expensive stadium in the world and have the largest housing development project in the city of Inglewood, just outside of it, with absolutely 0 units for affordable housing? These are the challenges of our time. In that case, I don't know if the trade-off is worth it. I'll have to see long-term, but I do know when you're promised something like that, the trade-off is that you get jobs. And we worked really hard, and Unite Here Local 11 in particular worked really hard to make sure that all the jobs in SoFi Stadium are union jobs. So at least people can afford to live in their community, $30 an hour to wash dishes, the kind of jobs that you can continue to build your family and stay in Inglewood. But that gentrification, I don't have a direct answer for that gentrification question, because the more you invest quality resources into a community, the more housing prices continue to rise. And so we need additional rent stabilization measures. We need additional rent control measures. We need more tenant protections and tenant rights. We need representation for tenants when they face legal eviction challenges. We need to support all of these things. We've got a lot of different potential solutions to this problem and different ways to attack it. I know that Senator Glazier's put up a renter tax credit because we have so many homeowner tax credits, and I think that's long overdue and a good idea. We've got to also make sure that our housing production is quality housing and affordable housing, and not just kind of the turn and burn things that Black communities in particular are afraid of. And it's interesting because I lived in a multifamily unit structure in a historically Black neighborhood and was the only one on the block when I was running for office. And so I saw this issue very close. It was a 3 structured development on a previously single family home lot. And it was important. There were a lot of us who lived there. A lot more people had housing than previously. But you could just feel that the community was terrified to see something like that go up. And so we've got to find ways to build in our community, invest in our community, and not lose the community.
Yeah, I love that. As an affordable housing developer, we see that, significantly, right? The community opposition is really challenging. And so we want to have everyone say yes. So love hearing that for sure. Shifting a little bit to kind of, our workforce, one of the biggest challenges right now that we're facing, and we're hearing it as the great, resignation, is staffing. And you mentioned those union jobs. We know how important the public service jobs are. They're chronically underpaid. Whether it's our social workers, our teachers, it could even be government employees. What do you think state and local governments can be doing to make it easier to hire and retain more public service employees and pay them really what they're worth so that they can live and work in the same community if they desire?
We need more union jobs, right? We need more collective bargaining to ensure that people have the kind of protections they need. But also we've got to make sure that the sectors that have been hit the hardest during the pandemic are the same ones that we're investing in as we build back up. Not every part of our economy just took a hit. It just happened to be the sectors that are disproportionately Black, brown, already lower income, indigenous, right, and others. And so we've got to make sure that any kind of recovery resources that we're using these surplus dollars for don't go back to the same parts of our state that produced the surplus to begin with, right? That part is doing just fine. We need to go to the folks who have been left out. And often it's the same folks who were left out prior to this pandemic. And the pandemic just exacerbated those conditions. And so investing in people, investing in workers is what we need to do. We just raised the minimum wage in Los Angeles. And in California, it's a historic high, but the cost of living is going up even faster, right? And so we pat ourselves on the back because we're about 3 years late to a wage that people have deserved for a long time, and that's still not quite enough to live on. And so we've got to keep a close eye on that and continue to push for not just the innovation of our companies and our business sector, but the innovation of our workforce, and making sure that if we're going to be a place where families grow and thrive, that those who grow up here can afford to still work here and live here. And that's something that I'm hopeful about. Governor Newsom has taken a clear focus on that. We've got a federal administration that's got a clear focus on that. I know the legislator, we're looking very closely at how do we expand the workforce and make sure that they're high quality, good paying jobs. And so, again, the people closest to the problem are the closest to the solution. So talking with folks on the ground who are working, talking with folks on the ground who aren't working anymore because of the pandemic or for other reasons, I think that's how we get to those solutions. You hear a lot right now that there's a worker shortage. I don't know that there's a worker shortage. I know that there's a wage shortage, and that the trade-off of going back to a job that doesn't pay you nearly enough when you found a way to be home with your kids and balance, surviving during a pandemic that's a hard thing to break out of. And we've got to invest in getting families whole and make sure that the things that were good about this pandemic, when it came to childcare and families being present and all of the above, are things that we protect as well. A lot of jobs can be done more remote than we previously thought. And so it's important for us to maintain that healthy life balance.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think for so many people, when they kind of reassess their priorities in the midst of the pandemic, I know I came to PATH during the pandemic as part of that sort of shift. I'm very grateful to be here now. You mentioned those surplus dollars. And I think earlier this week, the state government released even higher projections. So we're at $45 billion in surplus just as a floor. That is a lot of money to play around with. And you and your colleagues in the legislature are in the process now, I know, of setting out your priorities. How are you strategizing to get the most bang for the state's buck?
Yeah, I'm looking to put it in the pockets of the people who need it most. And then measuring outcomes. For example, like AB 1816, when you show that getting people housing and workforce development training right after incarceration not only reduces the likelihood of going back to incarceration, but reduces the likelihood that you become unhoused and increases the likelihood that you become a productive member of a community. All of that is about the best dollar per dollar we can spend. Right now, we spend nearly $100,000 a year per person to incarcerate per year, right? In LA County, we're spending upwards of $400,000 per young person per year to incarcerate in our juvenile justice system. So when you talk about bang for our buck, I'm talking about building healthy and thriving communities with these dollars. I'm glad that we've put money away in the reserve fund, but you have a reserve fund for crisis times. And despite what the surplus says, this is still a crisis time for a lot of people. And so it's time to unlock some of those dollars and get them where they need to be. The only thing I'm afraid of is that, 45 billion sounds like a lot of money, but it's really not when you've got 40 million people that you're looking after. And so we're making a lot of one-time investments that are historic, but what happens next year and what happens the year after that, when this thing that we've invested in that was incredible and good and worthwhile and had proven results no longer has the benefit of surplus dollars? How do we mold that into our consistent stream of funding here at the state level? I'm often reminded by Congresswoman Karen Bass, who is a close mentor of mine. When she was Speaker of the Assembly, the entire budget was $85 billion, right? And so this idea that we will always live in public prosperity in terms of our tax resources, that's not something that I'm naive enough to know is the case. And as a lot of legislators transition out here at the end of term limits in 2024, I don't want to be left holding a bag of commitments that should have been part of the lasting budget to begin with.
Yeah, I love the look towards the future, because I know, as someone who's been in homeless services for over 15 years, the word pilot is very difficult to hear. We do a lot of things as a pilot, but aren't able to sustain. So speaking of big strategies, we want to congratulate you on your recent appointment to the chair of the new Select Committee on Poverty and Economic Inclusion. What do you see as the scope for this committee, and how can PATH and other organizations help you make progress in these areas?
Yeah, I see the scope of this committee as one that centers lifting from the bottom. We don't often talk about poverty, at least not directly. And I can tell you there are a number of things in my bill package that, if you take a step back, they're poverty alleviation measures, right? And ways to cut burdensome fines and fees and economic weight from people who need us to help lift up and not put that pressure on down. And so what this committee I'm hoping can do is look at poverty in a holistic sense, a cross-sector sense, recognizing what can the public sector do, what kind of legislation can we do to cut through some of the burdens on families, but also what can the private sector do, as we were talking about jobs and making sure people are paid healthy wages and thriving wages. How can the private sector get involved? And what's the role in philanthropy? When we talk about pilots, I feel like foundations in particular are the champions of pilots, because we want to see something new every few months and we want the newest way to do this. But the reality is we have had a lot of the answers to a lot of these problems for a long time. We just haven't coordinated our resources and our strategies. And so this select committee, I hope, is a forum for us to have those meaningful conversations, to bring the best partners together from across the state, whether it be PATH or the Western Center or Michael Tubbs' new organization, EPIC, and others, to really talk through what are the ways that we can uplift those who've been pushed to the margins for far too long, and what is the role for a state government that has a $250 billion plus budget. Because when we identify what that role is very clearly, it'll help me as I corral some of my colleagues towards pushing for that same vision.
I'm so thrilled to hear you talk about bringing people up, right? And starting with the grassroots, starting with people who are really close to the problem. There's a very well-worn stereotype that politicians, they run for office, they get elected, and they lose touch with what brought them there. You've been a really powerful counterexample to that. You've drawn your roots as an organizer and your personal experience, but you've still been able to effectively navigate the bureaucracy and the realities of politics. What are some of your tactics to be an effective player in Sacramento without losing sight of why you first ran?
I think it's just that, right? Running for the right reasons. That's the first thing. There's a lot of, young people and all people who have decided they want to run for office at some point as just kind of a blanket goal. I want to run for office someday. And that should never be your goal, in my opinion. The goal should be to make the most impact you can make for your community. And as you navigate finding where that is, it might be working for PATH. It might be running PATH, right? It might be doing there are a lot of ways to make change. And there are a lot of important, powerful players in advocacy and in lasting changes in our community that aren't elected officials. Becoming an elected official is after you navigate some of those and realize that, you know what, I think I could make the most change in this particular position. And that's how I came to elected office. I don't often tell this story, but actually Supervisor Holly Mitchell offered me a way out of politics about the week that I announced I wanted to run. She called me and offered me a position as a justice deputy in her office in the county, as the justice deputy, the highest paid justice deputy the county had ever had. I'd have a pension, I could stay home, I could work on the issues that I cared about. And, I told her I can't do it. And she asked me why. And I told her my why. And after we got off the phone, she said, yep, you've got to run for office. And then she contributed to the campaign. And so I think as long as you find your way to elected office in a very rooted sense, it's easier to keep those values when you get here. I did have, I had a challenge early on in office where I was, supposed to vote yes on a $500 million raise to our incarceration budget, because every Democrat votes yes on the budget. It's the rule. And if you don't, you could be subject to losing your good office or not being on the committees you want to be, let alone chair committees. And I told the Speaker's office I couldn't do it. Can't vote yes on this. I was the only Democrat who didn't vote yes on it. And while people thought I would get punished, what it actually did was solidified my relationship with the Speaker in a meaningful way, because he knew, Assemblymember Bryan meant what he said when he ran. And he is who he is while he's here. And that's something that we should encourage people to do when they run, when they get here, be that same person. And so I'm grateful for his leadership in supporting and uplifting me. And it's the kind of culture I want to create for the legislators who come after me as well, to remember that you can be yourself. You can be rooted in the values you ran on. You might not get all the wins that you're setting out to get immediately, but if you keep the course, by the time you leave Sacramento, there'll be a lot of good for a lot of good people that happen because of your presence.
I appreciate you reflecting on that and staying true to yourself. And, shifting to social media presence, we really feel like you have such a strong presence in California politics, if not nationally. And we'll get to the strategy part. But first, can you share where your handle I Be Too Real came from?
Honestly, I don't know. I think I was, I didn't start tweeting or get on Instagram until like the end of graduate school, because I knew when I was younger, there's just going to be something in there that you're going to wish wasn't in there. Because as you're developing, through your spectrum of activism, you're going to go from the burn it all to the ground phase to the, be more pragmatic to operationalizing what change can look like. And so I didn't start tweeting until I was already into that phase of, okay, how do we actually get some things done? And I don't know, it came to me. I thought it was catchy. My partner thought it was corny. But over time, the catchy has caught on. I've gotten a lot of compliments on it, and she's come around.
Most important audience. That's fantastic. Well, you mentioned that there is, it can carry a lot of risks, social media. But why do you think it's so important for lawmakers like yourself to not just have that presence, but really run it yourself, even if it might make your communications team a little nervous?
Yeah, people want to hear from you. And they want to, I can't tell you how many people tell me that they feel like they know me because we engage online. And that it's part of kind of their daily information processing. And it's one of the places that they go to look on certain issues. And the fact that it's really me makes a difference. I can't tell you how many lawmakers, we won't call them out by name, but it'll be like, please join Senator blah, blah, blah this Thursday. And it's like, aren't you Senator blah, blah, blah? Please join me. That's a key indicator that somebody is running that account who's not you. And the good part about that is you won't ever say anything that's too problematic. But the bad part is people won't really know how you feel and how you think. And one of the things that I've learned about social media is that, your consistency over time is what people also resonate with, that this is really who you are. And I've been told since I've been in office, that some of the positions I hold swing in and out of political favor, right? This idea that we spend too much money criminalizing poverty and not enough money investing in lasting solutions is radical to some folks. And after George Floyd was murdered, it was like the mild take on where we were at. And now in an era of smash and grab narratives, it's back to being radical. And the reality is, I think it's just the kind of policy we need. It's the right thing to do, and it's good policy. And I'm going to be consistent through the years on it. And I think that track record of longevity is what's going to kind of build the support for those days when we're pushing the really hard pieces of legislation like AB 1816 and give it a fighting chance, because people will know that this isn't just the bill of the day, but it's a core part of who you are and why you do what you do.
Thank you for sharing kind of that and your strategy of how they get to know you. That was a great example of just looking at different media handles and seeing the language they use. You're exactly right. So many came to mind where I'm like, oh, they're definitely not behind the typewriter there, the computer. So for our last question today, we're wrapping up Black History Month, as we mentioned, and we've really been trying to highlight Black-owned businesses across the state. And of course, in the regions we operate, which includes Los Angeles and Sacramento. Do you have any that you would love to share, either in your district or the capital? And I'll just share one of the ones that's by where I live that's called Barsha is a great one. But we like to kind of get folks going to these places and not just in February, but the whole year. So if you have some to share, we'll definitely highlight them.
Yeah, I'll give you four real quick ones. One, I was sworn in a community swearing in at Hot and Cool Cafe. Hot and Cool Cafe is in Leimert Park Village. It's a very cool spot to get a cup of coffee and some good vegetarian and vegan food. It's a really healthy, health conscious business, and it was something special to be sworn in right there in the community in a small business. Soul Folks is also in Leimert Park Village. Amazing clothing. They actually bring together a lot of Black entrepreneurs and folks who have their own clothing brands, and they centralize them in one place where you can get all the cool fashion and all the new stuff. Simply Wholesome on Slauson is another great kind of health and wellness clinic, and good food and good smoothies and Jamaican patties. And there's a picture of Holly Mitchell right in the doorway, which is always a sign that you're in the right place. And then lastly, Hilltop Coffee, which is also on Slauson, and it is partially owned by Issa Rae. So if you are a fan of Insecure and you watched Insecure, they spend a lot of time at Hilltop, but it's a real place and it's in the district and it's pretty awesome. So I would definitely check out those four, and I could give you a much longer list, but I'm glad that you're highlighting these this year.
Yeah, thank you so much. And of course, now it's lunchtime. So for those restaurants, hopefully folks are heading over. I just want to thank you. I know Zeke's going to close us out, but is there anything else you wanted to share with folks that are going to be watching today?
Just thank you for tuning in, and thank you for supporting me and supporting Path. The work that you all do is phenomenal, and it's important and it's needed. I've seen some of the housing developments that have gone up. I've seen the work on the ground that you do, and it takes a lot to do it every single day and to fight for something that's bigger than yourself. And so thank you, Path, for being a partner in this work. I have your back, and I'm grateful to know that you have mine.
Thank you, Assemblymember. That's very appreciated. Always nice to have those words of affirmation. We definitely do have your back. Great. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap it up, and we're excited to see you. I think tomorrow for the point in time count.